So digital memory archives is my major interest here, experiences and thoughts, and the need for natural language processing. Somebody mentioned that, and of course that is, I didn't put that in the invite, but that's really what we're going to be focusing on tonight to a large degree, although we're also going to digress in a couple of other areas which interest me and a number of other people. Quantified self, as you know, is really about measuring your health, of measuring many of the metrics of your body and your activities. And last night, those of you who were there, you heard me talk about, you know, my life log, where I do a daily log and calendar and all that kind of thing, and that's wonderful. But my main interest really is memory. Okay, so that is another aspect of yourself, and how can we not necessarily measure, I don't know if measure is quite the right word for that, but how can we work with that, understand it better? And specifically, I'm going to talk briefly about memory and long-term memory here. So with long-term memory, I'm interested in where I am in the universe, and the universe for me to a large degree is my family, friends, pets, things, events, home, school, work, travel. It's pretty much true for all of us. These are some of the major areas we're interested in. And I have been using a camera for a long, long time. As a matter of fact, anybody who knows me knows I always have it, and I always take pictures of what's going on around me so I can remember the stupefied looks of people when they're looking at me. And the great thing about that, then, is that I also come from a long line of photographers. And that's my grandmother back circa 1911 up there with the camera, and another, and anyway. I inherited, therefore, an awful lot of old photographs and videos. I'm what they call a 21st century family archivist, and there's probably a few other people. Anybody else here in the room kind of class themselves as the family archivist? Okay, we got a couple here. Okay, that's good. And Stan and Max and I have been very interested in this, and we've talked a lot, and they'll be presenting later on in some relevant manners here. Basically, with the memory archive that I want to work with, I've got to acquire and digitize, I've got to organize, and then the fun part is presenting to family, friends, etc. And there's a number of really cool ways that that can be done. We're not going to talk about that right now. I'm working with photos, video, letters and documents, audio, and memorabilia. Memorabilia are really cool things, whether it's dresses or old picture frames or that old rocking horse that your great-great-grandmother used to ride on. But you can take photographs of that and store that too. So that'll also go into our digital memory archive, if you will. I inherited, as I said, trunks and trunks of stuff. And photographs were a big part of that, of course, in all kinds of frames. Some were worth saving, some were not. And we've created some really cool family museums and stuff from that, and that's also for another presentation. That's the antique stuff. In the modern age that most of you are familiar with, and I'm sure have access to, you've probably got tons of albums, shoe boxes, negatives, and if you're like me and a real serious photographer for a long time, you might have 35mm Kodachrome slides. And I won't try to do all the time tonight. But anyway, 40,000 slides I had digitized between 1999 and 2001. It took me 2.5 years. I did not do it myself. I paid somebody else. There are scanning services out there that will do that for you. It's a lot of stuff. In the modern age that we're living in today, and since really about 1999, some people started, by 2003 it was pretty common. Today it's ubiquitous, digital. Where do people store their photos? On the chip, in their camera, is where most photos are still stored. They've never made it off of there. Some made it to the laptop. Some to backup copies on CDs and DVDs, and some, best worlds I think, really, are the hard drives, and you can have lots of hard drives. I've got over 200 gigabytes. I keep them on hard drives all over the place. Facebook is where an awful lot of photographs are going today. Flickr, Shutterfly, Picasso, that's the cloud. Now there's some big issues between storing stuff on the cloud and storing stuff locally. I lived on a boat for over 4 years, as some of you know from last night, and the cloud really didn't exist for me except for the ones I kept watching to make sure they weren't going to do anything bad to us. So there is a number of reasons to have it in both ways, but we're not going to talk about that. Video. I just talked about still film. Video. Film, 1925 to 1990. I inherited a ton of film. Tape from 1980 on, doing VHS tapes, and then later on mini DV tapes. digital from 1990 on. A lot of people are now, of course, using their cameras. I use my iPhone for digital. I'm sure a lot of you do too. So the amount is increasing. 1925 to 1979, I inherited a ton of video from the family. That is a 400-foot roll there, and that is about 20 minutes or so. I inherited over 100 of those, and all kinds of little yellow boxes that hadn't been put into the big rolls yet. It took me almost 3 years to get all of that digitized. And that was, again, digitized on tape. Onto tape. A 1-hour mini DV tape. Problem is that later on, I mean, that was okay, because I could go through that 33 hours, is what it was, and cut it down to 4 hours, and then cut it down to the sections and bring it out. That was okay. But what do we do with sound? And this is the topic for tonight. This is where we're going tonight. I want to talk about sound. And these are VHS-C tapes. And then I went to mini DV tapes. And of course, you can do it now on chips. And you've got video and sound, and too much. What do they say? Write once, read never. It's a common expression in the digital video media these days. And so there's a real problem. So how can we, ideally speaking, I'd love to have something that could read all these VHS tapes in and go through it and transcribe the text. So I didn't have to sit there and watch the whole thing for hours and hours and hours. And instead, I could read the text and identify what particular parts I want to look at. What shots were in Spain? What shots mentioned Marianne, my wife? Or Kira, my noisy granddaughter. You can hear upstairs. Is there some way to go through the video and sound and transcribe the text using Siri, for example, or Dragon speech recognition? And some of the people here tonight are going to talk a little bit more about that. But, so I've got now my text perhaps written out. And obviously there's going to be a lot of flaws in that. But can I parse the text for key areas of interest? Letters and documents. Handwritten, starting back in the 1700s for my particular collection, but obviously further back for many. Printed, typed, and emails. Is there some way that we can go through this beautiful stuff here and documents, perhaps, even report books here from my, finding out that my grandfather wasn't particularly good at math, but he was very good at everything else. So letters and documents, I've got a lot. How the hell am I going to read through all that? I can barely read the handwriting because I'm just not used to reading handwriting. So I'd like to get that done, and I think Stan and a couple other people tonight may address this a little bit. This is what I'm interested in doing, getting those letters and finding the stories in there. The stories that are about my family, the stories that relate to that family, the stories that build into me. So, letters and documents again. How can we transcribe the text, parse text for key areas, and then, of course, there's audio. Luckily, not so much, but there was tapes in '76, there were CDs after that, videotape, and digital movies. Again, going into the audio area, and again, how can we transcribe the text, and how can we then parse that for the important stuff? So, photos, video, letters, and audio, just up to date, I've got 150,000 photos roughly, over 300 gigabytes of video, letters and documents, hundreds of those which I've taken photographs of and I've actually read. But I haven't parsed them out so that other people could read them easily. Audio, very few, but I do have some really cool ones like our wedding, 1976 in South Africa. I actually have that on tape, so I'm going to tape that. So, in future, what have I got to do? I got to go through still lots more albums. It's not over, unfortunately. Or fortunately, perhaps. It's a lot of fun, too. 40 hours of VHS, I figure, roughly, that I've got to go through. And this doesn't include the modern digital stuff, because, unfortunately, with a grandbaby now, we're taking more video than ever. And it's not just me now. It's, of course, my son and other family members, too. So there's an awful lot of video to go through. And letters and documents, I've still got hundreds to go through. And audio, unfortunately, not so much. So that's it, digital memory archives, and my specific interests there. And I'm hoping the people here maybe have some ideas, or perhaps can share some other thoughts. That's it.
So let me start with one question which is really on my mind as I hear you, which is that are you now creating at a pace faster than your capacity to process?
We all are doing that. There's no doubt about that. We're all creating faster than we can
So
process.
never mind the historical archive, but every day you get further behind, every hour you get further behind.
Potentially, yes. There are a lot of ways that I organize that. For a starter, I don't take much video anymore. I do my best not to do that. I let my son do that and other people. Speaking of which, I think he's videotaping here today. And then it was actually requested, I think, by Albert.
Just following orders.
Good deal. Anyway, as far as staying up to date with the photos, I do stay up with the photos. It takes work. It's worse than my daily log, for those of you who have heard me talk about that, which isn't really that tough. But trying to keep up with the photos, and I actually go through and edit them off of my iPhone every day or two, and then I put them back in, and I've got them organized by various categories, which we won't go into. But
What are you going to, what's your plan to do with this? Is it just to preserve it, or do you have some, you know, some goal?
I come from a long line of archivists who at least saved the information for future generations. They took it because, A, when you take a picture, you all, which you're probably aware, it helps you remember it, just taking it. It's very active taking it. Forces you to look and focus and understand it better. You might look at it briefly at some stage after you've taken it, and that's good too. And then later on, then you can actually look at it, share it, perhaps learn from it, organize it, pull out all the photos which are the best of boats, the best of flowers, if you want, or perhaps the best of your brother Bob or brother Dick. So my goal is to try to do that and try to understand not only how it works for me, but how it works for other people.
I have an ulterior motive for asking that, which is when my father died, he kept diaries for all his life. And when he died, I got his diaries. You know, little diaries this big, and the writing is like incredibly tiny. And I always wondered what he wrote in his diary. And when I got to read it, I found that it was beyond cosmically boring.
That's where the parsing comes in.
And I happened to mention this in sort of a meeting like this, and some guy from St. John's Library in Cambridge, the St. John's University Library, came and said, do you realise that there are historians out there who would kill to get this stuff? And I went, no, you don't understand, you know, how boring this is. And they said, the problem is that most history is written by sort of people who care to write history, and it records the kind of notable events of the day. And all of the kind of boring stuff of the day, what everyday life is like, tends to get lost. And what he said was, would you be prepared to donate your father's diaries to the library? And I, you know, after death, maybe you'd be willing to make some of this available to historians, because I think there's probably a lot of extremely valuable stuff in there. But you and I, perhaps...
Just touching on that a little bit, because you're absolutely right, a lot of this can be kind of ordinary for many of us, but I think most of us get a little bit excited when we hear about the daily lives of our ancestors. If you had to hear it for 100 letters with the same kind of daily life, that might get a little old after a while. But I can tell you that, for example, in one shot when my grandfather is panning across the kids on the lawn in Southampton, Long Island, New York, he stops for a minute and puts the camera up to the sky to take a movie of a Zeppelin going by on its way to New Jersey. Okay, that was pretty cool. And actually, when I wanted to get the movies digitized, I called all over the country, and there weren't a lot of places doing this back in 1999. It was very hard to find places that would turn your movies, old 16mm movies, into DVD at a reasonable price. Not into DVD, but into mini DV, which is the best quality available at the time. And I found Northeast Historical Films in Bucksport, Maine, of all places, because that's where I've been summering for years. That's where we've been living when we haven't been on the boat for the last 7 or 8 years. And so they said, not only would we do this for you, we'll charge you very little money to do it, which they did. And then at the end they said, by the way, we'd like to keep all your films for historical purposes. And we would like to maybe go through and edit them. Would you mind that? I said, be my guest. You know, we'd be delighted to have you keep the films, because otherwise where are we going to do it? And you're right, there's a lot of people who are interested in the history. Some of our family history ended up at Shelburne Museum, because there were a couple of interesting clothing pieces and stuff. And there are a lot of interesting things that are very quotidian, as they say.
Alex, did you have a question?
Yeah, this is going to sound like a weird question, but I'm really curious about how people think, especially when it's different than how I think. What would happen, how would you feel if you just let the whole thing go? Because when I chucked a whole bunch of boxes of old documents and photos, it felt like this lightning, like I could breathe. Like it wasn't this reality. So I'm curious how you...
I'd have to kill myself.
He would take those documents and go through them, make sure he didn't do anything valuable.
I have copies, so, you know, no problem.
So it just feel really tragic or something?
The question is, how big of a part of your life is it? Is it a big chunk of your personality?
The part that you saw that was done is done. I can sleep at night now, because I know that that's been done. I actually created a website. There's a lot more to this presentation. You just saw a handful of slides. There's a ton more, which you can do another time. But we built a website with 2,500 photos on that goes back to the family history and goes back into the 1700s even, with photographs of old paintings that were done and all kinds of stuff. So it's been done for future generations. As a family archivist, I've kind of done my bit. And I can go to sleep at night knowing that it's been done. But I would be very sad if I lost a lot of that, but it's been digitized now, so I can at least feel comfortable that it's been saved. There's still a lot I'd like to say, but I won't kill myself for that.
Okay. So my students were thinking about this, and they created a program called ChronoZoom. Have any of you heard of it? Or?
We're going to be talking about that.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it.
So Roland was my student.
Okay.
He's the guy that came up with it. But it's how we're going to, as a society, digitize and archive history. And if you're going to show it, it's really great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not only show it, but I mean, that is one of, the three of us have been talking a lot about this stuff, and ChronoZoom is one of the major things that we're very interested in, especially since it's local.
Yeah.
We'd love to talk to you some more about that later on.
You know what's interesting? Microsoft now has 3 research teams dedicated to expanding it out, one in Russia. So when people are sleeping here, they're working on it there, and then they're placed in Redmond and our team in Berkeley. So that was one of those things that was a need. And then if you tie it in with another group effort like Wikipedia and their PhotoSynth, where you can create the 3-dimensional worlds, that's how we're going to archive our history. It's going to be a group project where everybody contributes their elements.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about that archiving coming not just from me now doing all of this and having that burden and responsibility and finally getting it off my shoulder at our family reunion in 2009, which is a real hoot. We had a little museum of pictures and movies and everything. And then I said, you know, it's okay, at least I know it's copied now, it's safe in different places, I can live. But to be able to go beyond that then and be able to zoom it in all kinds of different ways is going to be very cool.
Let's
And
just
to
take a
have
couple more.
other people participating.
Quick question, kind of a little more higher level. There's kind of an argument for the experience or a self that is experiencing or self-aware or, you know, the moment. And then there's an argument around the remembering self. And I'm just curious about if, you know, it seems like you're living, I'm curious if you're living a life for the remembering self and possibly skipping over the self that's experiencing, possibly?
Well, that's a very good point, and it is true that we live in the present, but we also spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about the future in the present. A little bit about the past, most of us. I spend much more time thinking about the past than the average person, but still not that much time. I lived on a boat for 4 years. Believe me, we were very much in the present.
Sure.
And I think that I do kind of balance that out. There's many times when I'm really focused on the past, and that definitely gets a little too absorbing. And I do try to balance that. But I think most people naturally tend to live in the present and think about the future, and unfortunately forget a lot about the past. I've seen people go on $10,000 trips to Greece, to Egypt, and say, so, let's see some photos. Oh, we didn't take any photos. Well, what do you remember? Well, we had a good time.
Well, I would stress that as maybe a thought experiment for maybe to think about is if I were to say to you, go on this incredible trip with all of your friends, all of your family, it's going to be phenomenal.
Right.
But no video, no photos allowed. And then when you get back, we're going to wipe your memory clean of it. Would you go?
No.
Would be the argument.
No, it's a total waste of time.
Really interesting. Okay, well, in fact, maybe we'll just stop there because we've taken a bunch of time.
No, Simon had one
Okay,
question.
Simon.
I think, wait, gotta get in.
So one thing that really intrigues me about this is personal historians, and in particular, like thinking back thousands of years ago when the first person says, we have to actively record our history as a society. And then looking at that parallel as actively recording science as a society, say 500 years ago. And I'm kind of curious because a lot of us think about doing personal science, but I see you as doing personal history. And I'm wondering if you see as personal history and doing that as also like taking off virally in the way that we're talking about self-tracking.
Yeah.
I don't think it's taking off as virally, and there are a few people that I've found within Quantified Self that are really into this kind of concept of the viral, this history side of it. But most people are, again, focusing on the body and the quantified self. Just in the very definition, the quantified self sounds very much tracking things about yourself. And it's very hard to put numbers around a lot of this stuff. And that was my presentation last night too. It was very hard to put numbers around that. And Mick and some others, kind of picked on me a little bit there about, well, can you put some numbers to this? I go, this is a little hard. But Gary still asked me to speak. It's not.
Well, here's why. Let me just say why. Because I think you're talking. This is a subtle point, but I think it's going to emerge as a kind of set of questions. The normal qualitative tools we have for dealing with these giant memory archives will not serve us, right? So like a human being reading all the material, sort of intuitively processing it, you're going to bring some machine processing. We're all going to end up bringing machine processing to this material. And that machine processing will speak machine language, right? It will do things like analyze, it will do natural language processing, it'll do statistical analysis, And so what happens is, I think the language of comprehension and manipulation of our qualitative data will start to be a little bit quantitative. And it's hard to see it now, but you're stuck here as long as you're in the old style of meaning making. You're going to need some other meaning making tools to get there. And so I'll just leave that there. That's
why the natural language processing
Exactly.
kept coming up in red and was the focus for this evening's conversation. So I think we should.
Should we get George? Let's take
yeah,
another
one
comment,
second,
maybe.
quickly.
Yeah,
I'd like you to maybe just touch on the medical aspect of this.
Oh, the medical aspect, yeah, we talked about this earlier. It was another reason for doing this too is for people who've got Alzheimer's. I'm very interested in memory and cognitive assistance technologies for people who have Alzheimer's. It's a very interesting twist on the whole side of it because so much of Quantified Self is focused on the medical side. People who have Alzheimer's and are in mild cognitive impairment for other various dementias and such, is there some way that the caregivers can work with them in such a way? And one of the ways I found with my father when he was dying, for example, and other people as well have found, is to show them old photographs. And it brings them alive. And it takes them back because they may not remember the last 30 or 40 years, but they remember when they were 18. They remember when they were 25. And the brain is kind of funny as to which parts are going to continue to work. So there is definitely an aspect of that which is, if not quantifiable, it's at least physical right now. And the neuroscientists are trying to quantify and find out where those places are and how they work and how they interact. And are they in one place or, as they now suspect, in multiple places, and how is neuroplasticity working into that, etc. But coming back to natural language processing, I think we should move on.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.